Good afternoon. Minister Cardy of Education and Early Childhood Development has an update regarding the strike by CUPE. Dominic Cardy, ministre de l'Éducation et du Développement de la Petite Enfance, fait une mise à jour sur les relations de travail en ce qui trait à la grève des employés affiliés au syndicat canadien de la fonction publique. Minister Cardy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à tous. Over the course of the weekend, strike action resulted in a variety of impacts on services across New Brunswick. So work stoppages affected a number of services that we count on every day, including delays on ferry services, impacts on correctional facilities, court stenography services, and adult and child protection services. We also saw impacts on laundry services for hospitals and on some nursing homes. And probably most troubling, given that we are in the middle of a pandemic, vaccination clinics and COVID-19 screening in healthcare locations across New Brunswick was also impacted. So these functions are all obviously necessary to support the continued health and safety of all New Brunswickers. And government is going to continue to focus on our contingency plans and to explore all options to ensure that essential services can remain in place throughout the duration of this strike. So yesterday, as most are aware, government took further action to provide the education system with a greater degree of stability. There's been discussion around the words instability in education. I want to be very clear about what that means. That as we did not receive formal notification from most of the CUPE workers who have been out on strike since Friday morning, that put us in the difficult position of having no idea in any given hour or a day about which schools were going to be affected. Because of course, if someone is turning up for work in the morning, there's no guarantee they would stay there for the whole day, unless those plans are shared in advance, and those plans have not been shared with us. Ces services sont nécessaires au maintien de la santé et de la sécurité de la population. Alors le gouvernement continuera de se concentrer sur ces plans d'urgence et d'explorer les options pour s'assurer que les services essentiels demeurent en place. Hier, comme j'ai mentionné, le gouvernement a pris des mesures pour assurer une plus grande stabilité au système d'éducation. Les actions des syndicats n'étaient pas prévisibles pour les familles et le personnel scolaire. Ils ne peuvent pas planifier les jours, voire les semaines à venir. So, as everyone knows, today is the first day students will learn from home. This will continue until the strike ends. We have put virtual learning in place, not out of any idea that it is an acceptable replacement for face-to-face learning, but solely as an option that is better than the alternative, which is no education at all. We're doing this so the teachers can coordinate their lesson plans and students have at least some degree of certainty and routine in the middle of a very unstable time. It also offers more stability for the childcare sector so they can plan accordingly for the young people in their care. Vendredi, nous avons communiqué avec les garderies éducatives privées qui sont situées dans les écoles publiques et qui utilisent les services de conciergerie des syndicats pour leur faire savoir que nous sommes là pour leur offrir notre soutien afin de garder leur garderie propre, saine et sécuritaire et ouverte pendant la durée de cette grève. Je sais que cette situation n'est pas idéale et je sais que c'est une pression de plus pour nos familles, surtout que nous sommes dans notre deuxième année scolaire à gérer COVID-19. Je tiens à remercier les familles pour leur patience et leur coopération. Je tiens à remercier le personnel enseignant pour leur travail et pour continuer à se connecter, à appeler ou à prendre des nouvelles de leurs élèves chaque jour. On Friday, we reached out to privately owned early learning and childcare facilities located within New Brunswick's public schools, of which there are a good number, and those who use CUPE-provided custodial services, to let them know that we're here to provide support that they need to ensure they can keep their facilities clean, healthy, and safe, and open for the duration of this strike, while of course respecting all the laws and regulations that go around the management of a strike. I know the situation is a long, long way from ideal, and I know it's adding additional pressures onto families, especially as all of us are trying to navigate the second school year full school year managing COVID-19. So I want to thank parents, their families, and the students for their patience and for their cooperation. I want to thank teachers for doing their job and continuing to log on, check in, and call in on their students every single day. I cannot wait. The system cannot wait until students are able to return to classrooms and once again engage in-person, face-to-face learning, what our school system is designed for. Throughout the pandemic, my team at the department, folks at the districts across the province, and all the teachers and all the staff, including the folks represented by CUPE, who worked so hard for our province, they did everything they could to keep our schools open as much as possible. And that's still our goal. Not only is in-person learning essential for learners, but the whole school environment offers opportunities for the development of young people into fully fledged citizens, helps to provide them with the support they need to overcome the mental health challenges and stresses that are part of any school experience. And it's in that spirit that, as I said last week, our intention is to maintain online learning for the duration of this strike, in part because we have not had that communication back and forth with CUPE. But I can say today that if the leadership of CUPE is ready to reach out to me to talk about how we can have a clear, concrete deal, that if this strike, and I know that the CUPE leadership hope it doesn't last, and I know that the government hopes it doesn't last, but speaking here as a representative of the school system, looking out for the interests and for the future of 100,000 students in this province, that if CUPE is willing to reach out with solid commitments that are quite standard in many labor negotiations around which schools will be affected on which days, and we can have some level of predictability, then we can begin the conversation of figuring out how schools can be open face-to-face, at least in some form, as we go through this strike. My first hope is that this strike is ended in the hours, not days to come, with a collectively bargained solution reached by the employers and the employees. But in the absence of that, and always looking towards the future, I hope that the CUPE leadership will hear the message that I've just offered and reach out. I've had long discussions over many years with Sandy Harding and other members of CUPE, and Ms. Harding, I appreciated your note to me on Facebook the other day. So hopefully we can reach out. You know how to find me. The number is still the same, 238-5550. In the meantime, we want to encourage all of our students to stay as engaged as you possibly can during this time. Homework is going to be offered. Please connect with your teachers, and at the younger levels, complete the work that's assigned. And for the high school levels, please log on to your classes. And I've heard some reports this morning of some teachers having difficulty logging in and issues like that. Please be patient as well. Everyone is going through stress, not just caused by this strike, but the longer term stress of all of us working through COVID-19. So everyone's tempers are a bit more frayed than they would have been this time last year. And I'll certainly try to continue to remember that myself in all of my interactions as we try and act with greater kindness as we move through the difficult weeks ahead. And hopefully they'll be difficult because it's our continued efforts to control COVID and not because the strike is still ongoing. En attendant, nous voulons encourager nos élèves à rester engagés pendant cette période. Il est important de faire ses devoirs, de communiquer avec les enseignants et enseignantes autant que possible pour les plus jeunes, et pour le niveau secondaire, connectez-vous à chaque cours. Sinon, vous risquez de prendre du retard. Ceci est particulièrement important étant donné les perturbations de l'apprentissage causées par la pandémie. Les familles sont priées de travailler avec leurs élèves pour s'assurer qu'ils continuent à apprendre pendant cette période. If that work doesn't continue, you risk falling behind. This is particularly important given the disruptions to learning that have been caused by the pandemic. So families, please work with your students to ensure they continue learning throughout this period. I've seen and heard some of the messages about concerns of crossing a virtual picket line, but I'm quite confident that CUPE's goals in their negotiations with the government are to fight for the best possible deal for their workers, not to hurt New Brunswick students. That government, in our effort to make sure that the deals that we sign are sustainable, similarly, no effort, no intent to put students in the middle of this fight. So I'm hoping that as many students as possible will participate in the online learning that's being offered to them by our province's exceptional teachers, and that we can continue to have the discussion around collective bargaining take place where it should, which is in the boardrooms, around the negotiating table, and absolutely yes, on the picket lines. I know this period has been difficult on families, and we continue to work to minimize uncertainty, to provide stability, and to ensure continuity of learning to the greatest extent that we possibly can in the coming weeks. So thank you very much. Merci. I'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now proceed with questions from the media. Nous allons maintenant procéder aux questions des journalistes. Each reporter will have one question and one follow-up. You are invited to ask your question in the official language of your choice. Chaque journaliste aura une question et un suivi, et vous êtes invité à poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Travis Fortnum, Global.
Hi there. Minister, while I'm sure students and parents are very appreciative of you to take the time to speak to them today, I'm wondering if you're able to provide some insight on why we're not hearing from the Premier today or Labour Minister Holder.
Negotiations are undertaken by Finance and Treasury Board, not by PEDAL or by the Department of Education. And I understand the Premier is going to be coming out to give an update on some matters at, I believe, at 3:45 this afternoon. Quite possibly I'm wrong in the exact minute there, but check your emails, and I'm sure that invite will be there shortly. So I'm here to provide an update on the education system, because I said the education system is in a difficult position here, in between CUPE and the government and the negotiations that are currently going on. So I want to make sure that I'm here to speak for the system and for the needs of those 100,000 students, to make sure that we can do everything that we can to get them the education they deserve and to minimize the interruption of this strike on that education.
Thank you, Minister. Travis, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thanks so much. On that note, it sounded like, and I'm hoping you can clarify this for me, I might have it wrong, but it sounds like you're open to speaking with CUPE about which schools could be impacted by strikes or walkouts and when, and that would allow for us to return to a hybrid learning model or a more in-person learning model before the end of the strike. Is that correct?
Well, I hope the strike ends before we can set in place the sort of long-term deal that would be required to make that happen, but absolutely yes, because that is what we were expecting. Last week, our strike plans were based around individual schools. But when we saw that we didn't have clear communication from CUPE about which schools were impacted, we had to move to the whole province, and that was also the reason for the lockout announced yesterday. So if there's any way at all that we can move past that and actually have conversations about how our school systems can be kept open and safe, because CUPE members have done an incredible job of keeping our schools safe over the last year or so. Give a special shout out for the janitors on that. So absolutely open to that, but I want to make it very clear that we're not going to make announcements on a day-to-day basis here. And so if CUPE is open to talking about this, the next you'll hear about this will be, we'll come back and we'll say that 1 week from now, that sort of timeline, we would be interested in making a change. But there's going to be a long lead up time, because I've had questions from parents and teachers and everyone else saying, at least tell us what's happening for this week. So I can be completely 100% clear. For this week, it is going to be 100% online learning. And at this point, I have no expectations that will change for next week. And if the strike, God forbid, stretches into a third week, at this point, no expectations that we will be doing anything other than offering online learning in that third week. So it's going to depend on what we can get from CUPE, but if they're ready to be serious about a time and a plan, then absolutely my team is ready to talk with them on that subject.
Thank you, Minister. Maude Montembeau, Radio-Canada, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, M. Cardy. Vous m'entendez bien?
Ah, c'est le temps intéressant.
Bon, j'aimerais savoir, est-ce que vous avez tenté de faire les premiers pas, puis vous-même contacter les gens de CUPE? Vous devez avoir leurs coordonnées. On a compris votre numéro, mais j'imagine que vous aussi, vous avez leurs coordonnées?
Non, moi, je ne suis pas un membre de l'équipe qui est en train de négocier avec le syndicat. Alors, c'est clair que dans les négociations, que ce serait vraiment inapproprié d'avoir les différents ministres qui sont en train d'avoir leur propre chemin de poursuivre les négociations. Dans ce cas, j'ai déjà discuté avec le cabinet et le caucus pour dire ceci est mon idée, j'ai eu le plein soutien du Premier ministre et le reste de l'équipe pour dire oui, absolument, s'il y a une possibilité sur le côté opérationnel de créer un calendrier pour les grèves, etc., que je peux le faire. Alors, c'est seulement ça que j'essaie de faire aujourd'hui, mais à part de ça, je n'ai pas intention de mêler dans les négociations. Ça, c'est encore entre l'équipe du gouvernement et l'équipe du syndicat. Je suis ici pour faire tout ce que je peux pour protéger l'éducation des 100 000 élèves dans notre province et le reste de l'équipe scolaire, et aussi les familles, les parents qui sont impactés dans une manière vraiment sévère par cette grève.
Oui, bien, c'est ce que je voulais dire. Je me suis peut-être mal exprimée, mais dans cet objectif-là, pourquoi vous n'avez pas vous-même pris le téléphone et appelé pour voir s'il n'y a pas moyen de trouver une entente sur le côté opérationnel, comme vous dites?
Ah, absolument. OK, je m'excuse. Oui, ça, c'est une raison assez simple. J'ai passé du rencontre de plein caucus, je pense, 10 minutes pour manger quelque chose, et après ça, j'ai arrivé ici pour cette conférence de presse. Alors, ceci est la première opportunité que j'avais vraiment plus de 2 minutes pour avoir la conversation. Je vais absolument la suivre après si je n'entends pas de Mme Harding ou une autre membre de l'équipe QP.
OK. Puis, pour
Merci,
ma deuxième
Ministre. Merci,
question,
Maude. Vicky Hogarth, CHCO TV, please.
Thank you. Minister Cardy, can you give us an update on the province's program to help students purchase laptops for home learning? And are there still a large number of students without adequate technology to learn from home? And how are we trying to help those students?
Thank you for that question. The program that we put in place in the summer of 2020 to subsidize laptops for all high school students and making sure that every family has access to at least one internet-connected device, those programs still exist. All high school students can access them, and there's information on the Government of New Brunswick website and on the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development website. And if anyone has any questions or has had any issues getting through that, please drop me an email at dominic.cardy@gmb.ca, and I'll make sure your email gets to the right people. So I have not heard a lot of concerns there, because again, we had gone into this year knowing that we're continuing to deal with COVID, expecting that all high school students would have those devices. I would expect that we might see a bit more spottiness with maybe young children who are just entering the K-12 system, who perhaps don't have access to a device at home. As you can imagine, in 2021, that's a very small number of people, but those people exist, and we want to help them make sure they can get connected and online, so they've got a reliable device and also don't have to go through any stigma for not being able to make a purchase like that, which I know can be difficult for some families.
As a follow-up, I'm wondering what your advice is to parents who worked full-time with regards to facilitating on-learning, and is there any kind of financial assistance available for parents who require daycare?
No, there is not. This is the strike situation that faces us now. Again, I hope it will be very, very short-lived, and that both sides will come to an mutually agreeable resolution very, very soon. But in the meantime, this is the equivalent of other times when schools are closed for reasons beyond the control of the system itself. So the strike has again put education into a difficult spot, and I think the best that we can all hope for is a quick resolution to the strike to both sides.
Minister. John Chillibeck, Brunswick News.
Yeah, I'm a little confused because the QP negotiating teams have done this all collectively, and that had been agreed by government. It sounds like you want to negotiate some sort of side deal with people in the education system. Can you please explain that? Because I have my doubts QP would be willing to do that. I think they wanted to come into this with all 10 of their locals starting under one bargaining team. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. This is not about negotiations. This is about the way in which the strike. So this isn't about ending the strike. This is about how we manage the impact on the school system of the strike. And on Friday morning, the school system said early on Friday morning that the bus drivers were going out on strike. We have never received notification of other QP locals, other QP staff going out on strike. That's normally quite standard. And if we could get to a system where, again, we know that we fully respect your right to collectively bargain and your right to legally strike, but if you can tell us on a Monday or Tuesday of one week, that your plans for the following week are to hit the following school districts or the following schools, at least it gives us some path forward to being able to reduce the interruption on children's learning, which is really all I'm spending my time thinking about at this point. So it's up to CUPE.
Right, okay. So is your government going to do something today, like tomorrow, going to introduce back to work legislation or something along those lines, or will it just continue to let the strike play out?
Say at this point, I know that having, as I mentioned just in one of my answers in French, just having come from a long meeting of caucus and cabinet, that no plans in that direction at this point, but we're obviously going to be looking at things on a day-to-day basis, and I know that impacts in the healthcare system are of particular concern, but my hope is that we can use the long-established and hard-fought-for rights to collectively bargain and strike to resolve this. But I hope that we can do it in a way that quickly reduces the impact on our province's students.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, John. Jacques Potre, CBC, your first question, please.
Why has the throne speech been canceled tomorrow?
So the Premier is going to be coming out and doing, I believe, a Q&A in a little while on that and other subjects. And I know that I'm just glad that we're going to be focusing on the importance of this strike and recognizing that throne speeches are opportunities for good news and talking about an agenda going forward. But we recognize in the middle of a pandemic and facing job action by many thousands of New Brunswick's hardworking civil servants, that it's important that we focus on that and how we move through this and deal with that. But the Premier will have full explanation on all that and be happy to answer questions in a little while.
So is it at all to free up time for legislation, like back to work legislation, that the government might want to pass quickly?
Again, I just said the reasons that are the center of my understanding about why we are taking the action we are in relation to the throne speech, and previously answered in response to John's question about, certainly I'm not aware of any plans in that direction. So it's, but it's again something we look at on a day-to-day basis with particular look at the impact on the healthcare system, which obviously the province depends on at all times, but at this point, particularly in a time of COVID.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Jacques. Pascal Rachnaud, Radio-Canada, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est à peu près la même que celle de Jacques Poitras. J'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire sur l'annulation du discours du trône, de votre point de vue, en français, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, absolument. J'espère que je réponds toujours à tes questions en français, Pascal, mais si j'ai jamais fait une faute, je m'excuse. C'est encore, le Premier ministre va faire une point de presse sur ce sujet, je pense, dans une heure ou deux, cet après-midi au moins. Et de mon côté, la seule chose que je peux dire, que le discours du trône, c'est une opportunité pour célébrer les réussites d'un gouvernement et voir qu'est-ce qui est nos plans pour le futur. Et je pense à un temps où nous sommes en train de combattre la 4e vague de COVID, aussi, nous sommes en face d'une grève avec les mille des employés publics qui ont travaillé tellement fort pour notre province, qu'un moment de célébration comme ça n'est pas vraiment approprié. Alors, je suis sûr et certain que le Premier ministre va préciser et donner une réponse beaucoup plus compréhensive, mais pour moi, ça, c'est la raison pourquoi j'ai soutenu son position sur cette question.
Pascal, avez-vous une suivi?
Oui, j'aimerais, si vous pouvez nous expliquer en français un peu, qu'est-ce que vous offrez au SCFP comme main tendue? Qu'est-ce que vous êtes prêt à faire avec le SCFP pour peut-être ouvrir certaines écoles avant la fin de la grève? C'est quoi votre offre, votre ouverture?
L'offre aujourd'hui est seulement de commencer une conversation. Parce que je vais réitérer, je le dis en anglais, je vais le répéter en français. À ce point, l'intention est de continuer avec la formation en ligne entre aujourd'hui et la fin de la grève. C'est seulement si on peut arriver à un compromis avec CUPE qui va donner une assurance de stabilité et aussi une augmentation de qualité d'éducation qu'on va essayer de changer les choses. Mais s'il y a un changement, ça va être pris peut-être une semaine pour la fin de la semaine prochaine. Je vais vraiment réduire l'instabilité au maximum à ce point parce que je sais que les parents, les familles sont déjà inquiétés, sont déjà bousculés par cette grève et ont besoin de faire beaucoup de changements dans leur vie quotidienne. Je ne veux pas ajouter à ça pour dire « Oh, on a une bonne idée aujourd'hui, on va essayer de changer les choses demain ». S'il y a une possibilité d'avoir une un changement basé sur le travail avec QP pour le futur. Je vais être là pour la conversation, mais s'il y a les choses à changer, ça va être partagé en public et j'espère qu'on peut le faire, mais encore, la prochaine étape, c'est de commencer la conversation.
Merci, Ministre. Merci, Pascal. Shelley Steves, Global.
Thank you. We've been told that some of the workers locked out over the weekend handle payroll for teachers, and that could impact some teachers not being paid in a timely manner during this whole situation. We've been given examples of like D-contract teachers who were offered contracts in the last couple of months, supply teachers, casual staff, teachers returning from maternity leave. Can you confirm whether or not that is actually the case? And if so, why are these people being asked to do their jobs and potentially not being paid in a timely manner?
Could I ask you just repeat the first couple of sentences? I wasn't able to quite catch them. I heard the second half in the end, but not the first.
No problem. Yeah, we're being told that some of the workers who were locked out over the weekend handle payroll, and that could impact the pay in a timely manner for some teachers, including like D-contract teachers and supply teachers and that kind of thing.
Okay, so we've got, just get the details for that. So we have day-to-day supply teachers, long-term supply teachers who are engaged in the strike will be paid on November 5th. If the strike persists, some of those issues could be impacted, but the payroll personnel who are members of QP 2745 are absolutely right out. They are on strike right now. That will have an impact in a few weeks' time. That's why we need to, all of us as New Brunswickers, hope that we can and push as much as we can for the strike to be resolved as quickly as possible.
Shelley, do you have a follow-up?
I do. My follow-up question is regarding support for families with special needs students who had required EAs, and now that we're involved in at-home learning, many of those students can't take part in or aren't able to take part in at-home learning. I'm wondering what kind of supports are planned or in place for those families should this persist longer than a few days.
So it's unfortunately the same situation that we have during Christmas break, summer holidays, and other times when schools are closed. So the use of the online learning tool is really an effort to try and take whatever tools we have and use them to minimize the learning impacts on as many students as we possibly can, but in full knowledge that this is not ideal and that this is not offering the same level of support to all of our students. And that while there are a small number of students who excel with home learning and learn better on their own, that's not the case for the vast majority. And the students with special needs who rely on their EAs, that was again part of the reason for us moving to the lockout yesterday, that the one thing that from friends who are in that position, people who've written to me who are in this position of having children who depend on those EAs, that having a break in routine is terrible enough. Having multiple breaks in routines can literally set kids back by months or years. So the more that we can do to reduce that and maintain, again, some level of stability as we work through this strike, the better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Shelley. Marie Sutherland, CBC, your first question, please.
Good afternoon. I'm wondering, Minister Cardy, if you can tell me how many students did not report for online learning today, and are you able to attribute any of these absences directly to the strike?
So we have a school system that's decentralized when it comes to keeping track of all those things, down to the districts and then down to the individual schools. And I can tell you that one thing I have absolutely not done on the first day of handling a system-wide transition to online learning, in the face of having lost significant numbers of staff essential for managing the system, is ask them to send me numbers. We're on strike. The system is on strike. The schools are closed for in-person learning. And anything that we can do again to try and hold on to some form of education through this, I'm going to be there to back that as much as possible. But I am not going to be going out and asking for those detailed numbers on any day-to-day basis. And we wouldn't have them in a million years on the first day of a strike. So if we get them, I'll share them, but and I know they will be collected. But my goal is to reduce stress and pressure on this system at this point in time. We're offering online learning as an emergency backup, not as a replacement for in-school learning. And that's all I can say on that.
Thank you, Minister. Marie, do you have a follow-up?
I do. If the strike continues, at what point will the students' year be in jeopardy because they've lost too much school time?
it is on the first day far too early to talk about that. The only thing I can again say is that I don't think anyone in New Brunswick is ready to see 100,000 young New Brunswickers deprived of their education for a long, long period of time. And I hope, because I know that on the government side, that's something that is top of mind, partly because I keep on pushing it, but I hope on the CUPE side it's top of mind as well. Because negotiations are about choices, and every day that we lose of our students' education right now, especially after the days that have been lost and the stresses that have been piled on as a result of the pandemic, is a day they won't get back. And I deeply regret that the school system is in the middle of this strike, and I hope it ends in hours, not days.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Marie. Savannah Odd, Telegraph Journal, your first question, please.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
If you could speak up a tiny little bit. It's just, I don't know whether I'm just going deafer or whether the sound of the room's down a bit today.
Yeah, no worries.
That's
the
perfect.
Teachers Federation today said that the collective agreement is, quote, silent on learning from home. It's been a relatively new expectation for them. But the Federation also shared some general expectations for teachers for home learning during job action. So I'm wondering, how were those expectations developed if the agreement doesn't make reference to online learning?
Well, there's a lot of things that have happened over the last 2 years or so where we've built in the framework that provide the collective agreements with provide with all staff, not just in education, not just teachers. And if a collective agreement is silent on something, it means there's room for things to be built. And so we built a system that has allowed us to connect all of the high schools, to make sure that all high schools are connected, to make sure there are at least plans in 100 years, as imperfect as all of these are. And this is actually a moment for me to mention something else that I've heard expressed, asking about whether the usual system we have had in place for COVID closures, where attendance is taken and students are expected to be in school, and even if it's virtually, and if the numbers add up, that could contribute to discipline issues for the student. And we are not doing that in this case. So for those students that choose not to go online, parents choose not to let their children go online, there's not going to be academic discipline consequences, but there will be academic consequences because learning is going to continue in the imperfect form of online.
Do you have a follow-up, Savannah?
So the Federation also says that learning is going to, quote, be a focal point during the next round of negotiations. Do you see online learning as a tool that you'll bring out again in the future during maybe unexpected emergency situations, to the extent that expectations for online learning should be laid out in an agreement?
Well, I would argue they should be, without speculating about future negotiations, because clearly as we move towards more and more comfort using digital tools in our day-to-day lives, there's clearly a role there. But I think I would probably actually be on the same page with the Federation, that it actually has to be clearly defined in terms of its limits, because we are still human beings. We're not just little animated AI sitting behind desks in different places. And there's something about being in a room with other humans and talking with and engaging them that's hugely important for all of us. And people who went through the isolation of the first weeks of the pandemic had to live through feelings of depression and sadness that many adults have never had to confront before. And our students are often in an even more vulnerable position because they're young and still learning about who they are and about the world around them. So I think to me, the focal point of school, public school, has to be public schools. And that means teachers in their classrooms with their kids. Absolutely, during COVID, we needed to have online learning as an option. Right now, it allows us again not to compound the learning losses with more caused by this strike. But in general, I'm looking forward to having those conversations with the Federation. But I want to see teachers in schools with kids face-to-face, getting their hands literally dirty and learning about how to be good young citizens. That's their job. They do it very well. And they can't do it with 30 little green lights on a computer scattered around a geographic area.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Savannah. Simon Delattre, Acadie Nouvelle, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, bonjour M. Cardy. Bonjour Ministre Cardy. Je souhaiterais vous demander qu'est-ce que vous voudriez dire aux parents qui actuellement refusent l'éducation en ligne, boycottent finalement ce modèle que vous leur proposez actuellement, qui notamment veulent exprimer cela en soutien aux travailleurs et aussi estiment que se demande si cet apprentissage en ligne n'est pas un moyen de pression qui est utilisé pour faire pression sur le syndicat. Dans tous les cas, qu'est-ce que vous souhaiteriez dire aux parents qui refusent l'éducation en ligne?
Merci pour la question. Je vais prendre l'opportunité en commencement dire la même chose que j'ai dit en anglais sur la question d'être présent dans les classes. Pour les raisons que vous avez mentionnées, j'ai entendu des élèves, des parents aussi, qui ne veulent pas participer dans la formation en ligne. Ils me demandent ça va créer les conséquences. Est-ce qu'il va être mal s'ils sont indiqués comme absents? Est-ce qu'après 20-21 jours, ça veut dire que, OK, vous êtes absent plein temps de l'école? Pas de tout. On offre la formation en ligne, pas comme une alternative aux formations en personne, mais quelque chose qui est moins que la chose encore plus pire, qui est d'avoir rien de tout. C'est une décision des familles, des parents, des élèves de participer ou non. Mais on a besoin de l'offrir à un temps de pandémie où on a déjà perdu les semaines, des fois d'école, dépendant sur l'école ou région de la province. Et ceci est la seule raison. Ça ne met pas de pression sur le syndicat, quand j'ai mentionné. La participation est optionnelle, mais en même temps, c'est là comme une option pour les parents, pour les familles, pour les élèves qui s'inquiètent qu'il va tomber plus en plus en retard à cause du conflit entre les syndicats et le gouvernement qui gère leur système d'éducation.
Simon, avez-vous un suivi?
Oui, j'ai parlé à l'instant à la présidente de l'association des enseignants francophones du Nouveau-Brunswick qui demande votre démission. Elle questionne notamment votre capacité à gérer le système d'éducation et vous reproche d'improviser. Qu'est-ce que vous souhaitez lui répondre?
C'est la première fois que j'ai entendu ça, je n'ai aucun commentaire. Il y a les gens qui m'envoient les lettres avec beaucoup d'approbation, les gens qui m'envoient les lettres avec beaucoup d'insultes. J'ai une tâche à faire, mon tâche est de, malgré le conflit entre le gouvernement de Nouveau-Brunswick et le syndicat, de continuer de faire tout que je peux pour préserver une éducation de qualité pour les jeunes de notre province. Ça, c'est mon seule préoccupation. Je ne suis pas autour de la table de négociation. Je suis ici pour le système et pour les élèves.
Merci.
Merci, Ministre. Merci, Simon. Laura Brown, CTV.
Hi, Minister. I'm wondering, you had mentioned that you would like to be able to cooperate with CUPE and to be able to predict schools that could be serviced enough to reopen. At what point do you reach out to CUPE about that? Are you planning on doing that at some point this week?
Oh yeah, as I was mentioning, I had just I just happened not to have checked my Facebook messages over the weekend because I try to avoid some of the social media stuff and take a little bit of downtime on weekends. And it's not the formal way to communicate with me, so I can't really take that as it wasn't like a formal outreach, but she did send me a note. And as I just said earlier, we welcome her giving me a call, but if I don't hear from her, I'll give her a call.
And at what point would you say that like you'll finally, like, I guess in your head, if you can explain, is there at some point this week that you would like to recognize that this is going to take a while and we need to do something in the meantime to collaborate and make sure that some students can go back, or at what time in your head?
I hope she calls me this afternoon. If she doesn't, I'll try and call her. That's why I gave out my number. I don't have a current number for her right now, but I'm sure I will track it down and reach out to her, because it's, again, I think that the more conversations that can happen, the better in these circumstances. And if it was a misunderstanding, CUPE not communicating clearly on Friday, again, all I care about is everything that is humanly possible in the context of this ongoing conflict between the government and CUPE to ensure the education of our students. That's it.
Employee-wise, at what point, I guess, how many need to go back to work in order to make a school function?
That's exactly the sort of stuff where to reassure the system, the teachers, and the kids, and the families, I am not going to give any details like that. What I'm saying today is that if it is possible for CUPE and the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development to look at a way that we can safely open some schools at some points in time, we'll come back and share what that means. But that is not going to involve, this is not part of the contract negotiations process here. So this is going to be just something we'll see if we can work on it. And if we can, that's awesome. And if we can't, that'll be too bad. But at least I'll know that we tried.
Laura, thank you, Minister. Renali Ankins, CBC.
Minister, I'm wondering if you can elaborate on whether the province is anticipating any potential legal action by the union that may be taken in regards to the lockout or switching to online learning during the strike.
No, I'm not aware of any.
And given the stress of the pandemic and now a strike, has the province discussed providing mental health supports for students when they return? And if yes, what would these look like?
Well, so sadly, this is going to be yet another use for the several millions of dollars that we added into investments in mental health in our schools last year, not just for students, but also in some cases working with the unions for help for staff too, who are just like everyone else going through this and trying to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And, yeah, not knowing whatever horrors the headlines are going to bring all of us. So that's certainly going to be the another reason to get this strike over as quickly as possible, so we don't have students sitting at home in isolation, and get people back together and start to deal with addressing those problems as well as any academic issues. So it's absolutely something to look at the second we get back. And if the system says that we need more help in that regard, I'll do my best to listen the same way I did last year.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mernali. Erica Butler, CHMA.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
You could be a little bit louder, please.
Okay. I'll do my best. Hopefully that's okay.
That's great.
I'm trying to understand the purpose of the lockout announcement and what practical difference it will make. Schools in this area that I'm in, they were preparing for online learning already on Friday. So were there schools or school districts where that was not the case? And I guess I'm wondering if you can say which schools or how many schools would have been open today without that lockout announcement.
And that's the problem, is I can't answer that. And that's the part that makes the way that, unfortunately, the strike has started somewhat unusual and difficult to manage. That we heard that some staff were planning on coming into the schools today, but we didn't know formally which schools, just as we were not formally told that that some of the CUPE folks were going to be going out on strike on Friday. So it made it impossible to do any sort of planning. And I think the only way to make this a bad situation worse would have been if every single morning parents woke up, had no idea whether their school was going to be open, and worse, if they got to school, and then, because this is something that is sometimes done during strikes, some people left at the end of a few hours or whenever, because they are in a legal strike position, that if we then had to shut at that point. So it's making sure that we can guarantee that a school or group of schools can stay open. And the conversations that happen underneath that are pretty lengthy. We know for sure that's not negotiable, I know, and that's CUPE being clear on that. They sent us a formal notice saying the bus system was offline. But EAs, who we've talked about a couple of times during the course of this press conference, EAs are often assigned one-on-one to students. So if we know that only less than half, 40% of them are mandated, I thought it was actually 45%, so only 40% are mandated to turn up as part of the essential worker contingent, we can't possibly open most schools under those circumstances, because it would pose, in some cases, a serious safety risk to teachers, because some of the students who have EAs often require ongoing direct interventions to be able to make sure they can stay a calm part of a classroom. So those are the sort of challenges that we're having to deal with across the system. And again, I'm hoping ones that we can sit with CUPE and perhaps figure out how to make it work.
Erica, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhat clear, but so basically all schools were going to be online today even before the lockout announcement. That was the plan. Okay. And so it was going forward, the idea that some schools might be open, or you weren't sure which ones might be open, so you decided a lockout was necessary.
Well, it would raise the possibility of, if rather than closing individual schools, that once the system was closed or moved online, that if CUPE then decided to send the staff into a specific school on a particular day and then say, well, why is this school closed? But given that we have had no notifications or formal communications with or from CUPE about this, that just would have been a completely untenable situation. So again, what I'm hoping we can do is, rather than everyone looking at each other's social media and trying to guess what's going to happen, is if Ms. Harding or another representative of the union and I and our teams can work out a system so we can have some stability and keep some of our schools open, or some of the time, and hopefully all of our schools open some of the time, that would be great. Still second best. Best option is both sides reach a solution and everyone can happily get back to work.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Erica. Yannick Godin, Radio-Canada, votre première question, s'il vous plaît.
Jenny qui est plus au bureau, malheureusement.
Merci. Maud, je t'ai coupé la parole plus tôt. Avez-vous une autre question?
Oui, j'aimerais profiter du fait que le ministre parle français, puis qu'il est ministre de l'Éducation, peut-être pour lui demander de me faire un peu de pédagogie. La semaine dernière, M. Cardy, vous disiez que il n'est pas possible de consentir aux augmentations de salaire demandées par les syndicats parce que faut penser au futur, faut penser à notre système de santé, à notre système d'éducation. Et donc, je me demande, lorsqu'on pense au système de santé, c'est pas justement les travailleurs qui tiennent à bout de bras ce système de santé-là. Donc, est-ce que vraiment c'est le système de santé que le gouvernement a à cœur ou il est entêté à réaliser le déficit zéro?
Alors, on a déjà réussi d'éliminer le déficit, ça ce n'est pas le problème. On a une dette de milliards de dollars et ça crée une pression qui enlève les nouveaux programmes qui peuvent mettre en place pour les plus vulnérables dans nos provinces. Ça réduit notre habilité de répondre au choc du système qu'on regarde aujourd'hui avec le taux d'inflation est en train d'augmenter. Des autres problèmes dans le système financier autour du monde, et on a besoin de préparer pour ça. Ce n'est pas les années 70 ici. On est dans une situation aussi que notre population est en train de vieillir, et oui, on a une petite augmentation de population les dernières années, mais on a besoin de concentrer pour augmenter ça encore. Mais je veux dire franchement encore, ce n'est pas une question de pousser contre les gens vulnérables qui travaillent dans notre système, qui font un travail exceptionnel dans le système de santé ainsi que le système d'éducation. Et il y a une offre sur la table que donne les augmentations de salaire, donne les pensions pour un groupe aux éducations qui n'avait jamais accès à une pension, les autres choses comme ça. Mais encore, moi, je ne suis pas autour de la table de négociation. La seule chose que je peux dire est que je pense pour le gouvernement et le syndicat, il n'y a rien de plus important que l'éducation de nos enfants. Tout le monde a dit ça pendant toute la pandémie. On a besoin de souvenir ça dans un temps de tension entre ces deux groupes et j'espère qu'on peut résoudre ce conflit aussitôt que possible.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Merci, Maud, et mes excuses pour plus tôt. Avec cela, nous concluons notre mise à jour d'aujourd'hui. And with that, we're concluding today's update. Thank you. Merci.